move into this last portion of the episode where we talk about these ergogenic aids. An ergogenic aid is something that is meant to improve your physical performance. And so whether it be a technique or whatever, a supplement, something that is supposed to help you perform better physically. So I wanted to talk about 3 specifically, whether or not there's any validity to whether we should use these or do these practices in conjunction with powerlifting, our squat, bench, and deadlift. Specifically, the 3 that I wanted to go over, I have a study for each of them. The first one is ammonia smelling salts. The second one is music. And the third one is psyching up, hyping yourself up before you go and do a lift. Maybe you are and maybe you're not familiar with ammonia smelling salts. If you're not, totally go Google it and then you're going to find some video. Basically, it's this guy, he inhales this thing, whether it's a snap tablet or whether it is out of a little pill jar looking thing. It's ammonia. And you smell in the ammonia, it kind of burns your nostrils alive. I've used it a couple times before. I've never bought any, but I've used it before. And it supposedly helps you, focus and hype yourself up and be just a little more stronger. And that's how they market it, at least. It just kind of helps with your strength, your energy, and your focus. Now, I wanted to see if there was really any validity to how much these ammonia smelling salts can do for us. And as I went to go research this, it was actually very hard for me to even find human trials on these ammonia smelling salts. Now, ammonia smelling salts actually used to, I believe it's outdated now, but they used to be used to wake people up from unconsciousness. So if somebody, fainted, or I think back in the day in boxing fights, if somebody got knocked out, they would use these ammonia smelling salts to try and wake them up. Nowadays, the only thing I've heard them used for, again, if you didn't know, if I've heard in past episodes, I work as an EMT and a firefighter. The only thing I've ever heard them used for is, we don't carry them on our ambulances, but other ambulances do, and they have them in the hospital. Sometimes people will have what they call a pseudo seizure, which basically is where someone is pretending to have a seizure. So they kind of just close their eyes and they go, pretend to have a seizure, though they're just faking it. And so what they'll do, if the medical provider, they can do, perhaps it's a little unethical, but if they suspect a pseudo seizure, they will give this person an ammonia smelling salt. And if it was a real seizure, it wouldn't faze them at all. They would have no idea it was right in front of them. But if it's a pseudo seizure, it burns their nostrils alive and they start coughing and moaning and groaning at this ammonia. Anyways, I wanted to see if there were trials about ammonia inhalation and physical performance. And I found one study, believe it or not. On all of PubMed, I found one study. Now, this study does reference other studies, so studies that it references, I don't know where necessarily to find them, if not on PubMed or Google Scholar, but the name of this study is Elevated Arousal Following Acute Ammonia Inhalation is Not Associated with Increased Neuromuscular Performance. Now, that kind of says all you need to hear there, doesn't it? Ammonia inhalation is not associated with increased neuromuscular performance. But of course, let's go ahead and get into it. First of all, it kind of explains that the reason ammonia inhalants are believed to work is, it says it's believed that ammonia inhalation triggers the trigeminal nerve via chemoreceptors within the nasal, oral, and pulmonary mucosa. The respiratory and vasomotor centers within the medulla oblongata respond to this irritation, promoting inhalation reflex and increased blood pressure, leading to elevated respiration and heart rate. As they got into this trial, first of all, they used non-resistance trained male participants, 14 of them. And actually, in my last episode, I kind of talked about how that kind of is an issue with a lot of the studies that we read, is so many of them are non-trained. The reason that they use non-trained people in so many contexts is because it's easier for new weightlifters, those who are new to resistance training, to make more sizable gains in a portion of time. And so any differences between protocols are likely to be kind of exaggerated, more so that we can see them in these untrained lifters. And it's actually kind of a Similar idea for this study. They, wanted to have people who were not resistance trained because they're not used to stimulating themselves for the sake of maximal performance. So they believe that if ammonia was to have a genuine effect on these individuals' performance, it would be better and more easily seen through non-resistance trained individuals. In this study, they had 3 trials. Every participant, they performed a control trial first, which is all they had them do was take a sharp inhale through the nose. And that was it, just with room air. And then perform, in this study, they did knee extension and hand grip, maximum voluntary contractions. So they would just squeeze a hand grip dynamometer, and then they would, they have these special machines you get seat belted into to do a maximum force knee extension isokinetic dynamometer machine. And it just measures the amount of force production that these people are able to produce from the knee extension and from the hand grip. They also had them do a counter movement jump exercise. And well, they measured a variety of different things. And they measured things like the participants' subjective feeling of alertness. They did also measure the participants' heart rates as well as their perceived level of performance. And what that means is just how well do they think that they did at this exercise. So, for example, they would, just take a sharp inhale and then squeeze the dynamometer or whatever, extend their knee into the dynamometer as hard as they could. And then they would say, how well do you think you performed? And, presumably lots of people at the control are going to be like, I performed as well as I would have because all I did was take a deep breath of air. But then they had, for the second and third trials, they had one was a sham, which is kind of like a placebo, but it's not a placebo because they obviously know it's not ammonia. They used a water sham, but they wanted them to inhale something. And so they had them inhale just from like a cup of water to see if that would do anything. So again, it's like a placebo control, but it's not the same as a placebo. And then they had them breathe out, or they had them breathe in ammonia. And whether or not the ammonia was on the second or the third trial was randomized between the participants. And what we found was that the change in the perception of performance from the control condition was higher after using the ammonia inhalants, as well as the heart rate did increase and the perceptions of alertness did increase. However, the peak power production for every legitimate outcome of neuromuscular performance, power generation, peak power, average power, everything, nothing was affected. They were all unaffected by the ammonia inhalants. And so they just kind of talk about it in the discussion, enhanced levels of alertness, might explain the popularity of this supplement, the level of alertness and the perceived level of, how well you did, the level of exertion, those all changed significantly. And so it is definitely likely that those are why these things are so popular, as well as they mentioned that these ammonia inhalants might be able to do a good job at offsetting some of the decreases in physical performance associated with fatigue, more so endurance, because they could help increase your heart rate and get some better blood flow to the muscles. But as we think about ammonia inhalants with powerlifting, it does not appear that there really are any benefits to using them. Now, that being said, the thing that does work to improve your performance is adrenaline. And so if, for you, ammonia inhalants help you with your adrenaline, then that's good, and you should use them if you want to. There might be risks involved with inhaling ammonia, especially if you're doing it frequently. However, though the ammonia in and of itself does not appear to help, if you use it as a psychological tool to help get yourself hyped up, then perhaps it could work. Next thing I wanted to talk about was music. So this is a study called Effects of Preferred versus Non-Preferred Music on Resistance Exercise Performance. This is from Samford University in Alabama, copyright of 2019. I like this a lot. Their study design was kind of cool. What happened is they took their, I believe, let's see. They used resistance-trained males in this study. I was trying to decide or remember whether or not the study group, I apologize, was from this one or the next one. It was the next one, so I apologize. They used resistance-trained males, 12 of them, between the ages of 18 and 24, recruited to participate. And what they did in this study is they gave them a survey of different music genres and songs, and then they had them rate their favorite and their least favorite genres. And then they randomly selected one of the Billboard top 10 songs from that genre for this person, and then they tested their bench press strength for the person who had, or using the song that was selected from their favorite genre versus for their least favorite genre. So they had them determine a 1 repetition maximum. They had 4 attempts and would slowly increase the weight until, the person, either their 4 attempts were finished or they were not able to do the weight. They had 3 to 5 minutes rest. They determined that 1 repetition maximum, and then they had the people do as many reps as possible with 75% of that 1 repetition maximum, either during their preferred song or their not preferred song. And I want to show you this graph for all those in YouTube. It's funny. Look at that. Yeah, that top one right there. You can see it good, right? The one on the right there, where there's that huge difference between the 2 bars, is the motivation, the self-reported motivation of the athletes as they performed that maximum reps of their 75% 1 rep max. And there's a huge difference. They were incredibly not motivated at all during the song that they hated, which makes sense, but then they were much more motivated during the song that they liked. And there was a smaller difference between the actual amounts of repetitions, but it went to show you that there was a difference between the amount of repetitions that they could do with the music they preferred and did not prefer. So on average, they completed 10.5 reps of their 75% 1RM with the music they preferred, and they did 9 reps, 8.9 to be specific, but we'll call it 9 reps with the music that they did not prefer. So they improved on average 1.5 reps, which is pretty meaningful. And then, let's see. Maybe I'm thinking of the next one. I am. I apologize. I was trying to find how much their 1 rep max went up, but this was for the next study that I'm going to be talking about psyching up. It was not for this one. Okay, well, that's what we're going to get out of this study, is that 1.5 reps on average was the increase in their endurance and their ability to press 75% of their 1 rep max. With the music choice differences, and just for kicks, their motivation level from 0 to 100 was reported at 19 out of 100 with the music they did not like, whereas it was reported at 80 out of 100 with the music that they did. So this definitely goes to show you, and I don't think anybody's surprised to hear it, that music definitely can help you perform a little better at the gym. It is definitely a good ergogenic aid in that regard. I actually did a little experiment on myself a while ago. At this point in my lifting career, I could deadlift 365 pounds for 8 reps, and I knew that. And so the next week I went to the gym. I wanted to see how big a difference my music made, because I do really like loud music and it really gets me going during my workouts. And I wanted to see how much of a difference it would make. And so I turned on this nature sounds. It was like a running river and tweeting birds. And I wanted to see how much I could deadlift 365 for. And I was able to do it for 4 reps. So it was half of the reps as I was able to do it with loud music. Now that is super, super, super anecdotal. There could have been lots of different things that, had an impact on that. Maybe the music would have accounted for 2 of those reps, and maybe I was just tired anyway that day. I don't know, right? That is super anecdotal and not very strong evidence, but it just kind of goes to show music actually can play a huge role in our being able to lift heavy weights. Now this is the one that I kept thinking about. It's the one that I read most recently, in my defense, but this is from 2005 from the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research out of Wales. It is called Psyching Up Enhances Force Production During the Bench Press Exercise. And so this is just talking about the ergogenic aid of trying to hype yourself up and motivate yourself in your head, visualize yourself doing a lift, stomping on the ground, yelling, whatever it's going to be. In this study, they took 12 men and 8 women, and had to have at least 1 year of strength training experience. So they perhaps were not super experienced athletes, but they were resistance trained athletes. And then they put them through 3 different psych up, different trials. So one was called a free choice psych up, one was called a distraction control, and one was called an attention placebo control. Those orders were randomized, and I'll explain what those mean. So the free choice psych up is the psych up. That's kind of the one that we're hoping to see the difference on, is how well they're able to do when they have the free choice psych up. So the instructions given to these athletes was, they gave them 20 seconds to kind of think about how they were going to psych themselves up, and they said, I will now give you 30 seconds to psych yourself up using any method you like to obtain your best effort. And so they get 20 seconds to kind of think about how they're going to do it, then they get 30 seconds to do it, and then they perform. The attention placebo control is, basically without psyching them up, they wanted to give them some way that they were supposed that they would do better. And so basically what happened in this is they told the participants that when somebody is aware of their own physiology and their own arousal, that they are able to do better at physical performance. And so they asked them to estimate what their heart rate was, and basically the idea, they were lying to them, right? But they basically got these participants to think that if they were able to predict their own heart rate well, then that would mean that they would perform well physically. So they had the participant estimate their own heart rate, and then they lied to them and said that they were very, very close. They were within like 2 or 3 or 4 beats per minute of what their heart rate was, to try and think that they were in touch with their physiology and were going to do well, and that was their kind of psych up, in that regard. And then they had a distraction control, where basically they were distracted from the lift, so they were not able to psych themselves up in any way. So this was their control in that regard. So what they told them to do was to count backwards from 1,000 by 7. So 1,993, 986, 979, 972, 900. Anyways, that's kind of a difficult task to do. And so they had them do that for 30 seconds to distract them and not be able to hype themselves up, and then do their bench press exercise. Now, this is the one that I was thinking of as I was looking around that last study for it about music. But what they decided is that a increase from psyching yourself up of 2.5 kilograms was the lowest meaningful difference, because that's about 5 pounds. And so if someone was able to improve, they used a dynamometer, a bench press dynamometer machine for this. Basically, like if someone was able to improve their 1 rep max by 5 pounds, that would be meaningful to them. And so on average, the 1 rep max of this group was 70 kilograms. And so a 2.5 kilograms would be 3.6% of their 1 rep max. And what they found was that after they did the free choice psych up, they had an 11.8% greater 1 rep max than the distraction control, and an 8.1% increase in the attention placebo control. So that is probably, 7.5 to 10 kilograms in addition to their 1 rep max from these different types of controls. And there were differences in men and women, because there were 12 men and 8 women. So for example, the men did actually better at the distraction than they did the attention placebo, and the women did worse at the distraction than the attention placebo. They did better at the attention placebo. And so they kind of talk about that a little bit in the discussion, but to me that's not really, I don't care about the psychology of men and women as they psych themselves up. But what I think is cool is that we did see very meaningful changes as they psyched themselves up and as they listened to good music that they liked. We did not really see very good differences with the ammonia smelling salts. And with that, again, I'll say, do what works for you. Adrenaline works. if music works to get your adrenaline up, if yelling and stomping and screaming works to get your adrenaline up, if smelling salts work to get your adrenaline up, whatever it might be, that is going to help you lift more.